Great. I think with that, we can get started. So it's great to have you here today for our session focused on how Vodafone ties its research initiatives to business goals. We're going to start with a couple quick housekeeping notes. As you just heard, we will be recording this session and sharing it out afterwards. And we'll have plenty of time at the end, I think about 10 minutes for Q&A. So please post any questions that you have for the Vodafone team as we go through in that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. And we'll ask as many as we have time for. And then with that, we will get started. I'll introduce myself quickly first and then hand it over to our fantastic speakers from Vodafone. We have Georgie Thompson, Ashton Snug, and Nick Lockie here to introduce themselves. My name is Colleen Pate. I'm the Customer and Community Manager here at Dscout, and I'm dialing in from Cambridge, Massachusetts, as I mentioned. So I'll hand it over to you, Ash, first to share your name, title, a little bit about yourself, and where you're based before handing it off to Georgie.
Perfect. Good morning, hello, afternoon, all the good things. So as Colin, thank you for the great introduction. My name is Ashton Snoop, or Ash, as my friends and colleagues know me. I oversee a number of design and research teams exploring UX strategy, creative direction, product design for Vodafone's product and services division. We're based between 3 or 4 core locations in Central Europe. I'm based in Norfolk in the United Kingdom, and I work out of the London head office alongside my lovely good friends Georgie and Nick. Georgie, over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Georgie, and I'm the lead UX researcher at Vodafone Group. So like Ash said, I'm also based in London, working with Nick and Ash on the daily basis in our products and services team. And I've been at Vodafone now for almost 4 years. So for me personally, I typically work on more evaluative research projects. So you can normally find me testing prototypes or validating designs and concepts, or helping my product teams basically ensure that our projects are on the right track and we're delivering value for our customers. But prior to Vodafone, I actually started my career at a UX consultancy, where I was lucky enough to work across a number of different brands and sectors, which included finance, television, and actually telecoms. So I've kind of come full circle. And then I moved to Deliveroo, which was a food delivery service, where again, I was working in the research team to ensure that our customers, restaurants and riders, had an optimal experience when they were using Deliveroo. So yeah, overall, I've been working within UX research now for about 10 or 11 years. And yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this webinar. So thanks very much. I'm looking forward to this. And I'll hand over to Nick.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Lockie. I'm the lead UX strategist on the team with Georgie and Ash. So a lot of what I do is a little bit more on the developing and testing concepts side of things, and figuring out the shape of different value propositions and sort of things that our customers might like before we refine them down a little bit more. I've been at Vodafone for a few years now, but prior to that I was a UX and innovation agency. But before that, I had a career in broadcasting and worked as a TV researcher and development researcher, coming up with ideas for TV shows, and then moved into sort of the digital realm and had a bit of a sort of late career pivot into the world of UX in my 30s. So it's been a bit of an interesting path for me, but lots of the skills I've had in storytelling and things from broadcasting work really well within this sphere as well. So I think it's just one of those other weird skills that we throw into the team, and just kind of helps us do what we do better. So yeah, really looking forward to this discussion today as well, and sharing what we do a bit more.
Excellent. It's funny you say that, Nick. I find that so many folks who I speak to, they're in UX now, always have a really interesting journey of how they got there. It always kind of adds more to their UX abilities. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining. We do have a really incredible session planned with Ash, Georgie, and Nick, kind of sharing their really unique perspectives on the different aspects of the continuous discovery work that they support at Vodafone, and how their work is really critically supporting both product development and business decisions at Vodafone. So let's dive right in. To kick us off, Ash, can you provide some quick background for the audience about Vodafone, like more broadly as a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So If you're in Europe or Africa, you probably have heard of Vodafone and have used our products. I know lots of people that do. For those of you who don't, we are a leading telco that operates across Europe and Africa. We operate in 17 countries. I think we've got something like 43 partner markets and providing those services like 300 million customers. So it's a really amazing brand to be part of. The really interesting thing is that we've got a real passion for getting the sort of technology that we work with to drive real innovation and change for society. And what's really interesting is because we have such access to a large number of people, we have a responsibility to do really good things. So we've got a great mission that allows us to really focus on driving a more inclusive and sustainable digital society through great technology. And as a design function, that's a really great place to be playing. As we mentioned, we're part of a smaller division called Products and Services, and we address consumer needs across 3 portfolios called TV, Home and Flex. And that's everything from your broadband to Vodafone television through to the fintech services that we offer as a community. I think that's probably enough, unless you've got any other questions on that.
No, I think that's great. And I'm wondering of like, you know, how the kind of research teams work at Vodafone. I know we're going to dive into it a little bit later, but just like some high level setting there could be really helpful for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Georgie, I think Georgie and Nick are going to add a lot more sort of flesh to the bone or colour to the wireframes, as it were. But within CPNS, we have 2 essential research divisions. One is UX strategy, and that's very much Nick's bag, and it's at the beginning of the journey, answering the questions you've got on screen there. Are we building the right thing? And the other half of that is UX research, which is, are we building the thing right? And those 2 core questions allow us to connect with the wider community, our customers, and build products that we are seeing having a very meaningful impact and aligning to that overall Vodafone strategy we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. So, you know, we're really going to center this conversation around those 2 core questions that Ash had just mentioned. And, you know, you 3 had shared them months ago when we first met, of you know, kind of those dueling questions of, are we building or designing the right thing? And then are we building or designing the thing right? So Nick, you know, you and Georgie each own, I mean, all 3 of you, but particularly you and Georgie each own one of those questions in the work that you do. And there is so much collaboration back and forth between the 3 of your functions that I'd love for, you know, you to take us through what that back and forth looks like as you're working between those 3 roles, answering these questions.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a lot of discussion about how to sort of visualize this, and it's kind of like it's sort of 2 things. On one level, it's a linear thing, a linear sort of way of imagining where the products sit and where all the research studies sit. But then, as you can kind of see on this as well, that line loops back on itself and twists and turns, and it's not a kind of A to B thing. It's kind of like a to B via F, Z, probably some Greek letters, the occasional number, some emojis as well. It just gets really confusing. But I think the best way to understand the scale of which we work is that we're a product design team. So a lot of stuff happens before we do our work, a lot, you know, business casing, a lot of kind of exploring audiences and needs. But when it drops into our realm, it's kind of like, how do we turn that into a tangible product that actually gets to market? So if you kind of think of a left to right scale on that, so on the very left end is kind of more my domain, which is where it's like, you know, what are we designing the right thing? So what could this product be? What are all the different variations this thing could end up looking like? Where could we take it? What could we do? What are the different value propositions? And then as we sort of refine and iterate that, it kind of moves along the scale until, you know, we build that confidence over the kind of like, what is that itch we're trying to scratch for the audience, and how do we shape it? And then as it gets to the right, which is like, and then how does that product, you know, come together to get to market? That's where it goes to Georgie a bit more. So we know what this thing is for. Now, how do we optimize that to really do the best it can and make the biggest impact for our customers? And we're a very customer centric department. But what's really interesting is that at the start of the journey on my side, we also have to be very, very sort of sympathetic to how does that align to the business needs? How does that align to the commercial model? How does that align to the engineering teams and what they can build? Because we can't deliver value for our users if we can't get that to market. And a lot of that means that we work, with our stakeholders and other people around the business to really make sure that our vision for making something fantastic for the customers gets past all the stuff it has to do to make it viable as well. And Georgie will talk a little bit more about what that sort of near to market and post market launch looks like. But as we get into the middle, there's a grey area between what I'm doing and what Georgie does, and all of the designers that work with us, led by Ash as well. So it's hugely collaborative across that journey from left to right. But as we'll see in a minute, it's not just left to right as well. So I don't know, Georgie, if you want to talk a little bit more about your realm on that as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think, like I mentioned in the introduction, my realm is normally around evaluative research. So we've had the great work that Nick and his team have done to scope out, the questions that we might have, and basically check that we're creating something that our customers want or need and has some value to it. Because again, you can have beautifully designed products, but if they're not actually adding any value for people, then it's sort of a bit irrelevant. And on the flip side, where I come in is, you can have a great idea, but if it's not usable or it's not understandable to our customers, then also it's not going to work. So you really have to hit that sweet spot. So that's where I come in, sometimes pre-launch, sometimes post-launch, and sort of everything in between. But it's really checking that, okay, we've got this great idea, now what? How do we present this in our designs? How do we make sure our customers can really fulfill whatever experience or whatever sort of objective we need them to do? But I think what's really key here, and which is why we've got this sort of loop design, is that it's, like Nick was saying, it's not linear. Just because it comes to me, towards the end, I might discover something in my research that brings out some new questions that we'd not thought of. So, new ideas come up from our users, and I think actually that's something we need to explore further. So either that might be something I pick up, or it might be something that I loop back into the strategy team and they then explore that further. And the same with Nick. He's looking at the sort of more discovery side, but there might be instances where he sees that actually we can kind of fast track this. Let's just test this now because we know it's a good idea for whatever reason. Actually, let's, we don't need to spend lots of time workshopping this. We just want to get some answers in terms of how do people use this or work with this. So it loops around. It doesn't just start with Nick, end with me. It crisscrosses, and as Ash will probably explain in a minute, product design sitting in the center there is really integral as well. So Ash, I don't know if you want to mention anything in terms of your space in the middle there.
Yes, well, I mean, you guys have both done a really great job as always communicating that. And so, as the graphic really clearly articulates, design sort of sits at the intersect. But because we see design very much as an end-to-end process, we have that design talent mixing in from the very beginning to the very end, and all phases in between, much like we'd have colleagues from marketing and product being involved throughout this process. But I think that's quite a critical thing that you can find if you work with agency models, or if you work with companies with different structures, that you might outsource critical parts of, are we going to go and build the right thing? And that goes out for a long time, and it comes back to designers. And there's a bit of a virtual wall between how they think about the work. And same thing at the end, if you're validating designs. So it's been really critical to developing a very effective culture for developing the right products for our customers, to bring those disciplines together into what is really more like a spaghetti incident, but the graphic does a nice job to simplify for us.
I know I was pretty tempted to see if we could create more of like a spaghetti style, it's something a little more simple. But speaking of overlapping and crisscrossing, when we first spoke, you mentioned that your team's research ranges from doing discovery work, concept work to validate your roadmap, additional feature development and enhancements, as well as like ensuring value and impact for customers. And I'm wondering, and all these things are happening at the same time, right? So I'm wondering if you kind of want to walk through, like, are these all just really happening at the same time? Is there a way your team kind of tends to focus and prioritize across these four? I know we're going to kind of do a deep dive onto this fourth point in a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I think the reality is that all these things are happening in conjunction because of the size of our team and the demand that we have in it. And I can wax lyrical, but I think Nick has probably got an itch to scratch on this one. So Nick, do you want to jump in on these topics?
Yeah, I mean, I think those stages of research are probably quite familiar to a lot of people here. But I think going back to that sort of non-linear thing, we are, we're not a huge team, and we're jumping between projects and different products and different stages of products all the time. So it might be that the project that we're doing today, the one we're doing next, doesn't necessarily follow on from that one. We might be jumping on the next biggest priority for the products and services team. So we're always jumping between the two, but at the same time we're quite organized as well in terms of like understanding the roadmaps, understanding the questions that we pick off at any time. So we're often jumping between very, very early discovery to things that are near launch or post launch or something in between, and we're sharing insights across the team continually. We have lots of sort of meetings and ceremonies between the team, every week or every month, where we come together and we showcase what we do, and we share what we do with the wider business as well. But it's really interesting because partly by design and partly by necessity, we've never really followed the model where we'll have a researcher embedded in a product, just because while we were establishing the team, we had to be a bit more fleet-footed and help lots of different teams pick off the most important questions at the time. And over time, that actually became a bit of a secret superpower for us, because we're jumping between different products and different stages. A lot of the time, these teams are like really heads down in terms of just trying to answer their particular product questions and moving the dial on what they're doing and doing a really good job on that. But actually, we've ended up being in a position where we can often take a bit more of a sort of helicopter view on it and see what various different teams are trying to do, how they're all solving problems. And we can very often kind of go, there's a team over here that have come up with a solution that will work brilliantly for this product. Or actually, there's two teams trying to answer a similar question, and we can bundle that together into one study and get more value for them. So actually not having that kind of probably more traditional model where a product team will have an embedded researcher lets us move around a lot more, overcomes a lot of the bottlenecks as well, because sometimes you'll have a lot of work to do on one team and then things will slow down while they're putting that into engineering or something. So it just means that we can move our research resource around and make sure they're always really delivering value for whichever team needs it the most. And also, and this is something Georgie might explain a little bit as well, it sort of helps overcome some of the attachment we have to the products, and we can be a little bit more objective as well. I don't know, Georgie, if you want to pick up on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it just, when anyone that's experienced in being embedded within a team, which I'm sure lots on the call are, it has a lot of advantages for sure. You get to really know your product space, the stakeholders that you work with, but I think that can also cause you to become potentially less aware of any problems that your team might be facing or any challenges, and you might start just sort of taking things for granted a little bit, or just not really seeing the bigger picture. And again, like I think Nick mentioned, having an ability to work across teams, you can see how different product squads are organizing themselves, how they're managing things, and it kind of allows you to take the best bits from all and cross-pollinate that across all the teams. So rather than just sort of getting a bit stuck in your ways potentially, and that's obviously not always the case if you're embedded, but it can be that. We find that actually it's really nice being able to work across. And I think on a personal level as well, it gives us that experience of working with lots of different product teams, different questions that we're trying to answer, because you can get stuck answering similar questions, particularly in my end, when we're doing sort of evaluative work, answering similar questions over and over again. This makes it really interesting for us just from a personal perspective as well. We get to work in different challenges, different personalities, and yeah, I think it just keeps it interesting. So as well as all the great reasons that Nick mentioned from a business perspective, I think personally we found it really an enjoyable way to work as well.
Yeah, honestly, it sounds like such a unique setup in terms of, you do have that added bonus of having more of a bird's eye view of all these different products being developed, and maybe a little bit of a closer finger on the pulse of what's happening at the business, since you're not completely heads down embedded on a team. But For the remainder of our time today, we are going to dive in a little deeper on that fourth focus area that was outlined in the previous slide of ensuring value and impact for customers, because that is something that an additional thing that your team has been, I think, really unique in your approach of, first by applying, metrics to some of the work and the research you're doing, but taking that as a step further to create your own kind of like Vodafone custom metrics to help answer and address different questions that you had when relying on a customer effort score wasn't really doing the full job. So Georgie, I'm wondering if you can kind of like give us a little bit more of the history of how this came to be, why was this necessary for the business, and kind of how did you start? Like, where did you begin when this was kind of put in front of you?
Yeah, sure. So I think in a moment we'll talk through a bit more detail about what the metrics actually look like that we're using, but from kind of how we got to this. So I think really we reached a stage as our sort of research department matured that there became an obvious and desire really for a clear and easy to understand sort of insights, and that became more of a requirement. So we found ourselves with this kind of challenge, I guess you could say, of selecting and developing UX metrics that allowed us to more easily sort of assess our products. And we wanted to create also a common language with our stakeholders across the product cycle. So as we mentioned, this goes from discovery to validation, and we wanted that consistency to be present across the whole cycle, not just, I'm asking certain questions at one stage, Nick is asking something completely different at the start. To kind of allow us to benchmark to a level, and also have some consistency when we ask our customers, for their scores at the end of the session. And I think we often find that when we get to this wrap up part at the end of our sessions, this is typically the part where we get really interesting insight. This is where customers can sometimes come alive. I think they almost feel like they're not in a testing scenario anymore, which we try and help them feel throughout, but it's not always possible when you're being recorded on the screen and you're having questions asked at you and you're using a prototype. So almost when that stops and we get them to think, okay, how did you feel? How was your overall experience using whatever it is or with this idea? That's when they get talking. And we wanted a way of capturing that, because while we always did a wrap up previously, we didn't necessarily have a way to measure that experience. And I think that became sort of more needed, and there became more of a requirement for that to be measured in a more consistent way. But don't get me wrong, we definitely had a few doubts as a team at first about using metrics, particularly for qualitative studies. We typically talk to small cohorts of users in depth, but it's smaller sample sizes. So there was obviously a little bit of concern of like, is adding a score for this type of work the right thing to do? But I think we've now been doing this for at least a year, and I think the metrics that we've established, that we're going to talk through shortly, are really working well for us, and we're actually we're now advocates of it, which had you asked us 18 months ago, that might not have been the case. So I think you really have to give these things a try, give them a chance, and hopefully what we've learned can help others potentially use them for core studies as well. So I think that's sort of the background to how it came about.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to skip ahead just like one slide so that maybe as we talk through these three metrics that you've been using, they're on screen for folks to take a look at as you're walking through.
Yeah,
I'm happy to carry on, or I don't know if one of you guys wants to take this.
The thing is, we all know this so intimately now. And the weird thing is, it's been like, as they said, we saw it as a bit of an opportunity and challenge. And I think Nick's probably the best person to talk through this. What I said before, handing over to Nick, is we were surprised at how positive an impact this has had on our workflow and the engagement we've had with our stakeholders to understand and have a bite-sized takeaway from the research. You've got the depth research that we hear through commentary and video slices, particularly on the Dscout platform. But actually, these metrics have been so good at helping us and our designers progress and then engage with senior leadership across the business quite high up on big investment opportunities. And knowing where to guide and show products has been really, really exciting. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, I think what's probably my favorite thing about these scores is that they actually came out of a very sort of design thinking process. They weren't just born like this. We started off with customer effort score, CES score, which is one that's, you know, fairly well known. And we thought, well, out of all the metrics we could use, that was the one that, for two reasons really, like it was being used around parts of the business already, so there was already some buy-in for it. But I think from a design-centric team, really measuring the effort it takes for a user to achieve the goal, you know, you and hopefully they want to achieve, is a really great one from a design team, you know, because it's all about reducing that effort. So it gave us a score that enabled us to then go on and create very designable, you know, problems and solutions from that. So I think it felt like a natural fit. So we started off using the customer effort score, and we trialed it on a few studies, and it was great. And like Georgie says, we use it in the, you know, at the end of talking to a user for, you know, 30, 45 minutes, 60-minute interview, we have a section at the end where we ask the question, you know, based on the design you've seen today, how easy would it make it for you to achieve whatever goal we're testing for? And we were seeing it was working really well. And as a point in the interview to help them articulate that thing, it was really nice. They'd reflect on it. It'd give us something that we could very easily go back into the research notes and find their summary for it. But we noticed the limitation with using it by itself, which was it didn't really separate whether the value proposition and the idea was good and whether the design was good. And we were finding situations where, you know, we were fishing in the right water and we were hit a really good pain point for them, but they might not like the design, or they really like the design but the pain point was wrong, and we couldn't really separate it out with just the CES score. So we then created like a custom score. And there might be other scores out there like it, but we used the same 7-point scale, and we called that a customer proposition score. So the idea at that point became that we asked the CES score and the CPS score, proposition score, separately as two questions at the end of the interview. So we'd ask the proposition score first. So that question was, irrespective of how it was designed and executed, would a product or service that tried to solve this pain point for you be beneficial? And the idea for that was like, we can capture that sentiment then of whether we're fishing in the right water and whether we're onto something with the value proposition. And then by then asking that CES score separately, you know, presuming this is a valuable thing for you, is the way that we've executed design, would that make it easy for you? We could then see whether the design in itself had strength. And there's lots of situations where we were answering the pain point, but the design needed a tweak, and we could definitely look at that then. And then there was other situations where we didn't have the right value proposition, but there was something in the design that people really, really liked. And going back to that cross squad thing again, we can kind of go, well, there's bits of designs that we can recycle for this product for future studies with a different value proposition, or it might work for one of the other teams, or, you know, it shows that the design worked. So it kind of did double the work. We got to test out different design patterns as well at the same time that we could use as part of our wider design system. So it was a very efficient way of doing it. But then we noticed a third thing. So this is where the continual iteration of these scores came out, that, you know, like Georgie said, we're predominantly a qualitative team. We do a lot of talking to small cohorts in a lot of depth. And we were finding that, you know, as part of the interview, we were often building up quite a good rapport with people. We'd spent a bit of time with them. And then at the end, when we asked for these scores, particularly the effort score, they would give us a really great score, you know, because we'd explained what these products were, and they kind of got to like us a bit during the thing. But really, we were looking back going, but they stumbled over that bit, and they misunderstood a core part of the value proposition. So we introduced this third thing, the usability expert score, which we call the UXS score. And that is a heuristic measure that we all take. So after each interview, or after a bunch of interviews, the researcher, and usually the designers who have been taking the notes as well, then kind of look at the scores that the customers have given us. And we actually, through our UX expert eyes, actually see whether we need to adjust any of those scores. So for instance, the customer might have loved this product, but we actually know that they fundamentally misunderstood something in the copy or the design. So we would score the effort score down. Or it might be that they've given us a low CES, whereas actually the thing they disagreed with was the proposition, and they just kind of got confused between the scores. So it just gives us a little wriggle room there, using that sort of heuristic expert view to adjust the scores as well. And what we do is we report all three of these back to our stakeholders as well. So they've got a really clear sense of what's the value proposition, did the customers say they like the design, and then is there any sort of little tripwires or gotchas that we've picked up as a UX team where we have to clarify some of those scores or maybe give a little bit more context. So these three together have worked really, really well.
Great. Yeah, I think you mentioned being a year plus into the shift, so I would love to kind of like dig into how stakeholders are kind of like reacting or interacting with the metrics and like scores that you're reporting out to them.
I can talk to this a little bit, just in the sense of a kind of how we're educating, I guess, our stakeholders in using these scores. So now, now we've been doing it a while, everyone's certainly a lot more familiar, but I think we found at the start, or I certainly found at the start, that there could be an over reliability on the scores themselves rather than the sentiment and the patterns perhaps that we were seeing. So I often will run sort of iterative work where we test things, perhaps 2-3 times, change the designs and test again. And we would be doing these, we would do these metrics at the end of sessions, and we would sometimes find that, scores, let's say, were 5.8 in the first round, 5.6 in the second. We know as researchers in our team that those are both good scores. We shouldn't have huge concerns. They're both scoring well. But when you present that kind of side by side to your product manager or anyone else, it can feel a bit alarming. They think, oh, but we've been working hard on these designs, and actually it's gone down a little bit. And I think where the education happens here is it's not so much the exact score. Again, like we said, we typically speak to a small cohort of users, and on another day you could have 8 different people and the score might have been 6, not 5.7 or whatever. These things are open to a little bit of change, particularly when you're taking averages. But I think it's been an education that it's just a way of showing that something's either working well or needs a bit of improvement, and not necessarily getting bogged down on the exact score. And I think I needed to learn that myself as well, because I would also have the same question of like, oh no, I from a professional experience, I think this has got better, and I've actually witnessed people using this really nicely, but our scores don't necessarily reflect that exactly, or they're the same, and then people get a bit disheartened that they haven't gone up. So I think that's been a learning for us in how to communicate the scores. It's not the scores, it's how we use them and how we communicate that back to our teams to make sure they are valuable to our teams and not just sort of a number on a page. We want to make these usable and allow our stakeholders to know what to do with them. So I think for me personally, that's been a learning that I've found, and I've been sort of tweaking myself over the last year.
I think I just jump in and say the really cool thing is, if research really serves a role to inspire and drive conversation, and the scores have been very digestible and they're very clear, and they allow us to facilitate something that people can take away without having to think about all the nuanced detail. And nothing's empirical, no research metric in the world can say for a fact this is going to be absolutely bulletproof. What it does is, obviously, with great confidence, allows us to make more informed choices. But because it's bite-size, if you dive into details, see the comments, see task completion, etc. Because it's bite-size, that engagement has been very well received, and then people are feeling much more confident to make decisions and discuss, oh, how do we move the needle up or down? Oh, how's that going to track over time for these different layers of the product development cycle? So it takes a little bit of time to get your head around it. It's just the same as rating error ratings. It's just a different way to look at it, and the simplicity, I think, has been really key.
I think the best thing for me is it's given us a shared language with the stakeholders and the users as well. So actually, what we're seeing increasingly with the stakeholders is that it's far easier to articulate the difference between a problem with the value proposition and a problem with the design, and because when we actually bring these scores up on screen when we're talking on Dscout to our users, it gives us that moment in the interviews and often the video clips that we show where we can hone right in on where the users are discussing these scores, and it just helps us bring that to life for the stakeholders as well. And I think we're all a little bit worried when, like Georgie said, we were a little bit reluctant at the start because we were like, these scores are going to be used as a stick to beat us with if they go down, or are they going to be misinterpreted and scaled up? And we haven't really seen that. Everybody's been really sort of smart and switched on about exactly what they're there for, and it's not really there for the score in itself, though it is useful to track it. It's more that by asking the question through these metrics, it just really kind of condenses a focus of a conversation or making a point about the product that we're doing. So it's been more useful as that shared language in a way than it has as a score.
Yeah, and we know, our stakeholders are often time poor. We can't be delivering pages and pages of information every time we do a study. So it's really just getting that point across quickly in a digestible, clear way for them. And like we were saying earlier, for Nick and I, when we're running these sessions, it helps us condense that wrap up and really focus our attention on like what's actually important here. We've got lots of great work that we've just been doing looking at designs or prototypes, but actually now what's our focus and what are our core questions, what were our objectives for this, and let's summarize that. And I think these metrics just help us kind of get to the core of that in an efficient manner for us and for our team.
Absolutely. I think, the last thing I want to shift into before Q&A is, you've talked a fair amount about how you've, shared this out to stakeholders. I think next it'd be interesting to kind of shift into how you're inviting stakeholders or collaborators in. I know this is something that you use Dscout for as an example, and I'm sure other tools as well. But I would be curious of, if you could kind of share a little bit more about how you've historically used Dscout, and how your use of the tool has shifted as you've been able to have, folks in design and product like interacting with this and like weighing in real time. Maybe, okay.
Yeah, I can pick up on that one if you like. We've been using Dscout for quite a long time now, and as our approach has evolved, and I think the features have always been there to have viewers and collaborators and as part of that. And I think it's fair to say we didn't really use all the strengths of the platform when we first started doing it. And I think, from my perspective, there was almost like a little bit of fear of like drawing back the curtain and showing the stakeholders the messy process of the interviews and how we're trying to figure it out. And you almost want to present the findings with a nice neat bow at the end. But actually, we found that the more we've got stakeholders involved, often at their request, actually, the better it's been. And I've certainly seen on the studies that we've been doing lately, since the metrics have really been bedded in, that we're actually aligning a lot more of our other research ops around the Dscout process and what we do. So we're using, we're creating good spaces on, Teams and stuff like that, where we can share the session invites. We make all of our sessions open to any stakeholders that want to view them live, and they can ask other people along to it as well. So they join in a sort of the observational capacity where they can't kind of interact with users, but if they want to watch it live, they can. And often, when we've got half a dozen stakeholders on a project, I've seen interview, like I think in the last study I did, I had at least 2 stakeholders watching live on every interview I did, and often we'd have 3, 4, 5 stakeholders at once all viewing at the same time. So that's been fantastic. And then being able to clip out things and share the video clips afterwards and link out to them in our presentations, it's just been brilliant. And one of the things that we're really doing now is we're very confident in being able to give a lot of in-depth stuff to our stakeholders, but we're increasingly using the unmoderated tools on Dscout and the survey style tools to try and, as part of a study, to really amp that up a little bit. And it's working quite well because we've been in control of creating the study and the script for the interviews. when we want to scale that up a little bit and get some slightly bigger numbers, if you want to get 50 to 100 people to make sure that the insights we've seen in the interviews haven't been an anomaly, because we're then in control of actually creating the surveys as well. It's brilliant. We can actually really make sure that the same questions are being amplified properly. And I think, as we continue to do this, it's going to really help us to work with our colleagues who index more on the sort of large scale quant, either in-house or agencies, where we can kind of go, look, we begin to scale this up a bit. We're really interested in seeing how these specific questions really scale up to hundreds or thousands of people to really give the business confidence behind what we're doing. So investing in that middle ground where we're beginning to own a little bit of that sort of small scale quant, just to kind of go, we haven't just talked to a small cohort, we've got the depth, but now we're beginning to see how that holds at slightly larger numbers. And it's been really great. And Dscout's been a really good platform for trying these different things out. And also we've been using the same scores in the survey style stuff as well. So we'll include them in exactly the same wording as we would at the end of the interviews. And again, with the ability to add things like video clips and stuff into surveys and small scale diary studies from Dscout, it means that, again, we are amplifying the qualitative insights even at a something approaching a bit more of a quantitative scale. And often we can do a survey with video clips in it instead of doing in-depth user interviews, and sort of get that halfway house a little bit as well. So I think it's really pushing forward our study design and giving us a few more options there at the moment.
That's what I think that's what's really interesting. We're quite a big fan of Dscout in the way that it allows us to work and engage customers at a global level from the comfort of our home or our offices, which is great. But I think what's really interesting is from a leadership point of view, it's great to see the team having the ability to be much more experimental in their research methodologies, and through that process, being able to engage stakeholders throughout and also establish new paradigms for us. So whether we're using, prototypes for web or for mobile, or in fact, we're introducing new types of stimuli through things like storyboards or video concept design, it's also giving the design teams new ways to express ideas. And we're playing with that. So it's great because it gives us that access, but it's also a great platform just to play on and learn new things from an operational point of view, which has been fantastic to see for the team.
I think also I think Dscout's now really becoming quite embedded within our wider teams as well. I think that sort of signals how the maturity of our teams as well, but also the ease and how much people enjoy Dscout and being able to come to our sessions. And for a long time we've been encouraging stakeholders to come along and observe where they can, but I certainly found back in the day it was very much a case of me going out to them and saying, hey, remember we're doing this study, would love for you to come. And actually I'm starting to see the tables turn a little bit, where they're coming to me saying, oh, can you remind me when this is? Or I had a stakeholder in a session I did last week who couldn't come to them live, but they're now familiar enough with Dscout to say, but can you add me as a collaborator, and I'll go and watch the sessions when I'm free. And I think that speaks volumes, I think, hopefully in terms of our team. And we've encouraged our stakeholders to really be involved. We take them along the process now. It's not just a case of we do the research and they come in when we deliver the results. Like Nick said, we're trying to get them involved, even if it can be a bit messy at times. You see the process, you understand that. But I think also speaks volumes for Dscout that are, people that aren't necessarily traditionally engaged or involved with the research are now familiar with the tool. They know it exists, they know how to access it, and they're choosing on their own accord to jump in, and they know how to access the videos. They can, be involved without even us needing to guide them. And that's also great for us because it's less time on us, needing to send things. They just know how to use it. And I think that's really happened in the last kind of few months. So I'm hoping that continues, particularly as, like we've been saying, we're trying out new methodologies and we're trying out different ways. It's not just a case of, come and listen to this interview. We want people to be involved with our diary studies or our surveys as well. So I'm feeling really positive about how we're using it, but also how our teams are using it as well.
That's great. And I think it leads us right into a couple questions that have come in through the Q&A box. Running a little behind on time, so we will try to get to maybe 2 or 3 questions. but I know we will have more from the Vodafone team being published on like our People Nerds blog. So if there's anything we weren't able to address, not to worry, there's more coming soon. One thing is, one of the questions that came through was Nick mentioned that there was a reluctance about sharing what was behind the curtain. And then these concerns actually didn't come to life. Demet was interested in finding out like what kind of caused this result and what factors were at play. Do you think it was just like this level of awareness that you'd built over the last few years, kind of trust in the team, something else?
I think a lot, we spend a lot of time talking to our stakeholders about the research processes and what works for them and what doesn't. And I think a theme that's come out a lot is just being able to hear things directly from the customers. I think the impact that has and the little reality shock it can have sometimes is really, really valuable. I think it's like it's also really important as a research team to curate it though as well. I think we saw very, the minute we started getting stakeholders along and they started talking to each other and going, oh, can I invite somebody else? Can I invite somebody else? They would get super excited about what they were seeing. And I think a lot of the time, part of our role is to know when we can give them free rein to go and explore stuff and when we need to guide them a little bit. I think the level of enthusiasm we see when they've seen a couple of interviews, we almost have to kind of pause and go, wait for the end of the study, because you need to see the bigger impact. And these might be a little bit of an anomaly. And actually, one of the interesting things since we've been running the small scale quant is that, we're getting a far bigger sense of where there are weird little things that we might want to investigate in the future, but actually what are the things that do scale to a lot of people? And especially if we can, ask questions in different international markets and see what might be a localized question, and actually waiting until we get that data set back to complement the in-depth stuff can really either help underline the really important bits that we believed in, or kind of go, actually, do you know what? There's something that surprised us when we saw this data come back, and we might want to go do a follow-up study or ask this in a different way, or, compare these two different cohorts together, So I think it's that all of that together has been great, but I think it's the exposure. The minute stakeholders see, customers answering these questions and just how interesting that is, that's really helped spread the word on the power of these interviews, I think.
No, a much more tangible kind of direct question, I think, is what led you to use a 1 to 7 scale instead of 1 to 5 for the scores?
Oh, this is not that simple to answer. A lot that has been a point of much discussion, I have to say. But I mean, if you look, I know we went around the houses on this one a little bit. And if you look at all metrics from a quant qual perspective, there's a lot of discussion, disagreement between quant and qual specialists on what scale to use: 1 to 5, 1 to 3, 1 to 7, 1 to 10. We felt when we were going through the process and auditing a whole bunch of research guidelines and our own experiences and looking at what other teams were doing inside the organization, that 1 to 7 felt like the perfect slice that gave us enough detail to say, yeah, this is performing very poorly or extremely well or somewhere in the middle. And there was enough for us to sweep away. But when you dive into it, there isn't really a wrong or a right way. 1 to 10 feels normally a bit more labor intensive for the customer. 1 to 5 seems a little bit too vague. And then 1 to 7 for us felt just right. It's like Goldilocks and 3 bears. And it just felt just right for us when we pulled all those different data points together. But it was a bit of a discussion point. I think Nick and Georgie may want to build on that, but it was
it came out of when we were looking at adopting the CES scores. There are the variations on CES out there, and it's kind of like, even that was like just trying to get anybody to agree on what the definitive CES looked like was hard. But I think in terms of like from a qualitative interview point of view, we were finding that often customers' reactions to the products were nuanced, and 1 to 5 forced them to make a choice a bit too much instead of exploring that nuance. Whereas, like Ash said, like a 1 to 10 scale adds to the cognitive load on it, and especially when you get into the survey realm, doesn't really work as well. So 7 gave us the best sweet spot, but I think the main thing was consistency. Once we picked it, sticking with it, and Georgie and I did a lot of work on adjusting the wording over time as well. We found out initially, like, we didn't get the consistency quite right, and Georgie was asking a direct question of like, do you find this valuable? And I was asking as to what extent do you agree with this statement? And then we were asking the question. So we did have a little sort of calibration bit sort of midway through where we looked at how all the scores were working. By that, we had lots of these little calibrations, which is how we did the other 2 scores as well. And then we just decided that we wanted consistent wording across all the scores, across the way we asked the question, even down to kind of like, whether we would label all of the points or just have, the extremes labeled and the middle one. What do you call the middle one was another one that we had to kind of like thrash out as well. It's quite a hard question to answer, that one. But I think it's like Georgie said back at the start, this is more a catalyst for asking questions. It's just a really good thing to ask why about when you've got something solid to ask. So as long as we're consistent, I think that's fine. And actually, I saw another question pop up in the chat that I might as well pick off here as well, about whether we
self-moderated.
Research shop's head coming in now. But I saw somebody ask about the UXS score versus the CES score, and like whether one replaces the other. And that was actually a question that we had as well. About originally the UXS score was called the Pro CES score, and then we all felt a bit icky about that, and we all felt we felt like it wasn't really our role to change what customers had said, but we also needed to make sure that we contextualize where those scores were perhaps not the best measure of the success of the product. So what we do now is we capture all 3, and we usually report all 3 back. But depending on the research, different metrics come into play. So on my end, on the value proposition, the CPS score about the proposition is more important than the CS score because the design's not finalized yet. Whereas when it moves into George's realm, the CES score is probably more important because George is hoping that I've got it right on the proposition anyway, though things come out. And then with the UXS score, we'll report it, but we'll only linger on it if there's a discrepancy between the CES and the UXS, and usually there's not that much difference. So we just acknowledge we've done it, but actually we go, these scores feel about right. So
yeah, I was going to add to that there doesn't need to be a discrepancy between the 2. We're not trying to change the scores. It's just having that overlay that if we feel it's necessary to create what we believe to be a more accurate representation of how a user has managed with our designs. But I've actually found in a lot of cases that I've felt their scores have been fair. So it's not a case of us needing to add our own stamp to the scoring. It is only when it's required, and a lot of the time that won't be the case. So it's often just the 2 that are required, but the 3rd is there when we need it.
Excellent. I think we're going to end with this one final question, which wraps it up nicely. We actually do have someone who is joining from the Vodafone team, but over in the German market. And they'd shared that they work in more of a B2B area. So the sample size is pretty small for qualitative research. And they're interested in how you follow up on insights on the quantitative level afterwards.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So like I said earlier, we've got some fantastic teams within Vodafone that are specialists in the quant stuff. We've also got a lot of partner agencies that have a lot of expertise in asking large scale studies, often are far more confident than we are in terms of things like statistical significance, or might have an expertise on behavioral science or something. So it's not really something that we want to do where we try and do that. But what is interesting is where instead of having to, a lot of the time it can take a long time to spin those studies up. So if we can almost kind of like take that first little step where we've got 50 to 100 people just showing whether these patterns hold up a bit bigger, it can often kind of give stakeholders enough confidence to really shape what comes next. And often that will be us and the stakeholders working with the in-house teams or the external agencies to kind of go, okay, this is a metric we really want to scale up to get confidence in there. And I think it just helps bridge the gap a little bit there when we can begin to just nibble away at that kind of the numbers a little bit, because the perennial thing you get as a qual team is, well, you only spoke to a small number of users, and we know that numbers shout loud. What we want to do is help the numbers shout about in a way that complement the deep insights that we've got as well. So yeah, it's been it's an ongoing process, but we're really excited about that opportunity now.
Excellent. Well, I feel like we could go on and on and on. There's so much here that I'm excited to dig into in future content. But for now, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining, and an enormous thank you to Ash, Nick, and Georgie for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. I think this was, it was really exciting for us to be able to kind of dive into how you've developed these metrics and what you've got going on over there on the Vodafone team. To everyone who dialed in, you will receive a recording of the session within the next 24 hours. Frequently, it's sooner, so just keep an eye on the inbox that you use to register for the session, and you'll get the full recording. Well, with that, thank you so much, everyone. Have an excellent rest of your day.
Yes, thanks, Colleen. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, bye-bye.